Welcome to the deep dive. If you're listening to this right now, you are probably staring down a really massive stack of readings.
Oh, yeah, the dreaded exam prep pile.
Exactly. Getting ready for your professional planner exam, and, we know you're right in the thick of it. So today, our mission is to completely unpack the CIP ICU standard of practice for climate change planning.
Which is a outfit.
It is, yeah.
Yeah.
But let's get one thing straight right off the bat here. You're not just memorizing this to pass a test on a Tuesday morning. This is the literal logic you're going to use when a city council asks you, why they should fund a new multi-million-dollar stormwater system instead of, say, a really highly visible public park.
Right, the real-world application.
Yeah, so by the time we're done here, you're going to understand every core concept, every framework, and every section of this source material. Not just as a student, but, well, as a peer, stepping into a massive professional responsibility.
And I think it's important to acknowledge up front that it is a weighty document. It can definitely feel really dense on the first read.
Oh, absolutely.
But I really want to reassure you, while it covers a lot of ground, the underlying logic is incredibly sound. It gives you this structured blueprint for navigating the very messy, totally unpredictable reality of urban planning in the 21st century. So we're going to map this out together so that the reasoning behind these standards just becomes second nature.
Okay, let's unpack this. The whole thing kicks off with a statement of principles. There are 8 of them, and they serve as this ethical and professional foundation. But rather than just reading a list, let's look at what they actually demand of a planner.
Right, because they are actionable.
Yeah. The foundation starts with a simple reality check. Principle 1 is basically that climate change is real, it's happening right now, and it directly threatens the public interest.
Which means it is unequivocally the planner's job to deal with it.
Exactly. But then it immediately hits you with a dual challenge. We have to tackle this through 2 distinct lenses: mitigation and adaptation.
Yeah, and that dual challenge is really the drumbeat of the entire profession right now. So mitigation means intervening to decrease the rate of climate change, reducing greenhouse gas emissions, protecting forests that act as carbon sinks. Basically, you're trying to stop the bleeding.
Right.
And then adaptation is acknowledging that the climate is already changing and we have to minimize those negative impacts on our communities while, maybe even finding new opportunities.
Wait, though. If we're mitigating and adapting at the exact same time, don't those 2 goals ever clash?
They absolutely do.
Because what if, say, a city decides the best adaptation for extreme heat is putting air conditioning in every single building? But then powering those units causes a massive spike in emissions. That would completely ruin the mitigation goal, wouldn't it?
It would. And what's fascinating here is that the standard anticipates exactly that kind of conflict. That's why another core principle, Principle 3, insists that mitigation and adaptation cannot be siloed.
They have to talk to each other.
Exactly. They have to be coordinated with broader sustainability objectives. If you look at them together, you spot that AC problem early. Instead of just adding power-hungry cooling units, maybe you adapt by designing buildings with passive cooling or planting massive urban canopies.
Or changing building reflectivity, right?
Yes. That adapts the city to the heat while mitigating the emissions. You find the synergy instead of the conflict.
That makes a lot of sense. And it leads to a point I find incredibly empowering for anyone entering this field. Keep Principle 4 in your mind, especially if you're feeling overwhelmed by the exam. The standard explicitly states that planners must take a leadership role here.
Because the profession is uniquely built for this.
Right. Planners rarely have perfect information. As a planner, you are already used to balancing what a city needs today against what it's going to need 50 years from now. Comfort with uncertainty is basically a job requirement, and right now, that is a superpower.
It really is a superpower, and you're going to need it because the 5th principle makes it clear you cannot do this alone. The scale of climate change requires an interdisciplinary response. It has to cross all levels of government, the private sector, and the public. You essentially have to be the connective tissue between the hydrologist, the local politician, and the neighborhood coalition.
Which brings up the human element. Principle 6. The text doesn't let you forget that the impacts of climate change are profoundly unequal. If a neighborhood floods, the wealthy families might have insurance, right? They have the ability to relocate.
But vulnerable groups don't.
Exactly. So planners are directed to put a massive focus on equity and environmental justice.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, It changes how you weigh decisions. It means you aren't just looking at the overall economic cost of a disaster, you're looking at who specifically bears the brunt of it. And you can't figure that out in a vacuum, which is why public involvement is mandated as the seventh principle. The public isn't just an audience you present a finished plan to, they are partners. They have local, lived knowledge that will inform your technical models.
And the final principle, Principle 8, takes that local focus and just zooms all the way out. It states that a planner's responsibility doesn't end at the city limits. It extends globally to the biosphere as a whole.
So we have the ethics down, but ethics without a practical plan is just daydreaming. How does this document actually structure the work we need to do?
Right, the framework.
Yeah. The text organizes everything into 3 distinct layers. Think of it like building a house.
Let me guess, layer 1 is the blueprint.
That is a perfect way to look at it. Layer 1 is the conceptual foundation. It outlines the core issues and summarizes the key elements of climate change planning. It gives you the big picture of what you are building and why it matters to your daily practice.
And then layer 2 is where you start framing the walls. It expands on those key elements, giving you specific practice considerations. And what I found super helpful for studying is that layer 2 includes these text boxes with real-world examples.
Yes, the jurisdictional examples are great.
They really show you how different towns and cities have actually navigated these exact issues.
And finally, layer 3 is your toolbox. It's an annotated list of resources, documents, and web pages. If you need a specific municipal climate action plan to use as a template or detailed implementation guidelines, it's all indexed there by key element.
So the structure really moves you from understanding the theory to seeing the application to actually picking up the tools yourself.
Exactly.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. When the text dives into that first layer, the core issues, it provides a crucial comparison between mitigation and adaptation. There is a summary matrix in the text, and honestly, listen to me on this. You need to be able to visualize this matrix on exam day.
Oh, without a doubt. It is prime exam material.
It compares the 2 approaches across motivation, action and impact, and key challenges. Let's break that matrix down.
Starting with motivation. The standard describes mitigation as a mix of enlightened self-interest and ethical responsibility. Because emissions are a global problem, reducing your town's carbon footprint helps the entire planet. But adaptation is driven by direct self-interest. You are adapting to protect your own community's survival.
Think about that phrase for a second, enlightened self-interest. As a planner, you were usually tasked with protecting your specific city's tax base, fixing your specific potholes. Mitigation asks you to spend local dollars to solve a global problem.
It's a massive paradigm shift.
Yeah, you have to convince a mayor to fund green transit, not just to clear up local traffic, but because Canada has high per capita emissions. And we have an ethical duty to vulnerable communities on the other side of the world.
It is a really tough sell, which ties directly into the action and impact category of the matrix. For mitigation, the actions happen locally, but the impact is inherently global. Your city's emissions reduction only moves the needle when combined with thousands of other cities.
And adaptation is the inverse.
Right. The action is local, and the impact is immediate and local. If you build a seawall, your town doesn't flood. The benefit is entirely captured by the people who paid for it.
And then we hit the key challenges. The document states that the main challenge for mitigation is that it demands a radical departure from the status quo. Tinkering around the edges won't cut it.
No, it won't.
But adaptation has a totally different nightmare, which is profound uncertainty. You're trying to build adaptive capacity for a future you can't perfectly predict. You might be designing a stormwater system based on rainfall events that have literally never happened before.
You're flying blind to an extent.
But reading through this, a question pops up. Why are we pushing so hard for both right now? I get mitigation, but why can't we wait to see exactly how bad the local impacts are before we spend billions on adaptation?
This raises an important point, and it's one you will hear from taxpayers constantly. The answer comes down to momentum in economics. The climate system has massive inertia. Even if we cut all emissions tomorrow, the greenhouse gases already in the atmosphere guarantee a certain amount of warming.
That change is inevitable.
Exactly. Past emissions have locked us in.
The text also references the Stern report, right? Which is this massive economic review of climate change. The takeaway there is that effective mitigation today is vastly cheaper than trying to adapt to a catastrophic worst-case scenario tomorrow. It's like changing the oil in your car. It costs a little bit now, but it saves you from replacing the whole engine later.
And proactive adaptation works the exact same way. If you wait for a 100-year flood to wipe out a neighborhood, you are paying for emergency rescues, rebuilding infrastructure, and economic collapse. If you proactively zone that floodplain as a protected wetland today, you save lives and billions of dollars.
To really drive that urgency home, the material focuses heavily on what this means for Canadian communities. If you are taking a Canadian planning exam, you need to have these specific projections locked down. We're talking about average temperatures rising by 1 to 2 degrees Celsius by 2020.
Which we've already blown past.
Right. And a staggering 5 to 10 degrees in most parts of Canada by 2090. And if you're planning in the Arctic, the projections are even higher.
And it isn't just heat. The patterns of precipitation are shifting violently. We will see more rain overall, but because of higher temperatures, water will evaporate faster. That leads to increased aridity.
Some more frequent droughts.
Droughts, shrinking lakes, and massive wildfire risks.
Plus, the coasts are literally shrinking. Atlantic Canada could see sea levels rise by 50 to 70 centimeters by the end of the century. British Columbia and the Western Arctic are looking at 18 to 59 centimeters.
Yeah.
That isn't just a loss of beachfront. That is salt water pushing into the drinking water table and destroying the underground infrastructure.
It's devastating. The standard categorizes the fallout of these changes into 5 distinct impact areas. First is ecosystems.
Yeah.
And we aren't just talking about polar bears here. Think about the pine beetle.
Right, because the winters aren't getting cold enough to kill them off anymore. They're thriving. So suddenly, a local planner has to account for a forestry pest wiping out the primary industry of an entire region.
That leads directly to the second impact area, which is infrastructure. The built environment wasn't designed for this. Up north, you have roads and building foundations anchored in permafrost. As that thaws, the ground literally turns to mush. Highways buckle.
And in the south.
Energy grids will overload from air conditioning demand during heat waves, and stormwater pipes will just burst during extreme rainfall.
The third area hits closest to home: human health. Extreme heat directly causes mortality, especially in cities dealing with the urban heat island effect. But there are secondary health impacts too. Warmer climates mean vector-borne diseases like Lyme disease from ticks are expanding their geographic range deep into Canada.
Fourth is the economy. The cost of climate-proofing our cities will be astronomical, but failing to do it will be worse. Entire resource-dependent industries like fishing, forestry, and agriculture will face massive disruptions.
And the fifth impact area is perhaps the most sobering. It's called a world under stress. The text makes it very clear that we cannot just build a fortress around Canada.
That is a critical realization. Canada is a wealthy country with high technological capacity. We can adapt better than most. But we are tied to a global economy. If less developed nations face agricultural collapse, widespread conflict over water, and mass displacement, the economic and migratory ripples will absolutely reach Canadian shores.
So we know the ethics, we know the threats, and we know the structure. How do we actually do the work? That brings us to the 7 key elements of climate change planning. But before we even list them, there is a giant warning label on this section. This is an iterative process.
Yes. If you try to run these 7 steps as a strict linear checklist, you will fail. You will constantly circle back. You might reach step 4, get new vulnerability data, and realize you have to go back and completely rewrite step 1.
The text also warns against window dressing, doesn't it?
It does. If a city just puts some solar panels on the library and calls it a day, they're failing their obligation. The response must match the scale of the problem.
Let's walk through the 7 key elements so you can trace the logic for the exam. Step 1 is creating a roadmap. This is your foundation. You frame the challenge, evaluate where the community is today, project what it will need tomorrow, and map out a vision.
Honestly, this isn't fundamentally different from standard urban planning. It's just applying those traditional skills to a massive new variable.
Step 2 is institutional arrangements. And this is where a lot of plans die. Local government is a maze of silos. The Parks Department doesn't talk to the Transportation Department, and neither talks to the provincial authorities.
For climate action to work, the response must be joined up. You have to create the bureaucratic mechanisms to force collaboration across departments and jurisdictions.
Once you've hacked your way through the bureaucracy, step 3 is consultation, communications, and education. We talked about public involvement earlier, but this is where it gets tactical.
Climate action almost always requires a painful shift from the status quo.
Yeah, it competes with other goals. People will be angry if you take away parking spaces for a bioswale, You have to work aggressively to educate the public, build consensus, and turn critics into partners.
Step 4 is assessing impact, and if there is one technical distinction you must grasp, it is this one. You have to use scientific evaluations, but mitigation and adaptation require entirely different diagnostic tools.
Let's use an analogy here. Think of it like taking care of your personal health. Mitigation is about the overall system. So you step on a scale to track your weight. In planning, that scale is a greenhouse gas inventory.
A GHG inventory.
Right. It sets a baseline of how much carbon the community is emitting so you can measure your diet, your emission reductions over time.
That is a great way to frame it. And adaptation is completely different. Adaptation is when you fall off your bike and you need an X-ray to see exactly which bones are broken. In planning, that X-ray is a vulnerability and risk assessment.
You forecast the specific local impacts?
Exactly, like a flood. And then you assess exactly which neighborhoods, roads, or populations are most vulnerable to that specific risk. GHG inventory for mitigation as your benchmark. Vulnerability assessment for adaptation.
Once you have your diagnosis, step 5 is assessing the response. You know the impact, so what are the solutions? This is heavy on cost-benefit analysis. Do your existing systems just need a tweak, or do you need to rip up the streets and overhaul the infrastructure entirely?
Step 6 is implementation. The talking stops here. You take the approaches you selected, lock them into your official planning documents, change the zoning bylaws, and most importantly, ensure the budget is actually allocated to make it happen. A plan without funding is just a suggestion.
And finally, step 7 is monitoring and evaluation. This is why the process is iterative. A lot of climate planning tools are based on educated guesses. You build a system hoping it handles a future storm, but you don't know for sure until it happens.
You must constantly monitor the results against your goals. As climate models get more accurate, your plans have to evolve with them.
So what does this all mean? We have just built the entire mental map of the standard of practice. You know the 8 ethical principles that anchor the profession. You understand the 3-layer structural framework.
You can articulate the massive differences in motivation and impact between mitigation and adaptation.
You've got the terrifying reality of the Canadian climate projections and the 5 critical areas that impact memorized. And you can trace the iterative 7-step process from the initial roadmap down to the ongoing evaluation.
As you close the books for the day, I want to leave you with one final thought. The document highlights a stark, almost philosophical reality. As a planner, you are currently learning a massive toolkit of regulations, zoning laws, and engineering standards. But almost all of those traditional tools are built on historical data.
We base the future on what happened in the past.
Exactly. So how will you reconcile using tools rooted in history when you are planning for a future where the only absolute certainty is unprecedented environmental change?
It is the ultimate challenge of your career. You have to invent the future while you are standing in it. But after walking through the logic of this standard, I know you have the framework to handle it. Best of luck on your professional exam. You're stepping into a vital role, and you've got this. Keep questioning the status quo, and we will catch you next time.